This story started years ago, when I was 5. I lived with my parents and my sister at the time. Nothing out of the ordinary. We moved to a different house in the same town, but I was sent to a new school because this one was way closer now. I have most of these times pretty blurred in my memory because I was very young, but there are some days that I can see as clear as water. This is one of them. It was my first day of this new school. I was very nervous. I wasn't the most extroverted kid. I was extremely shy and insecure, and I still am to this day. A very sweet and loving woman came to me and explained that she was my new teacher, but now it was English time, and she took me to this other class. There they were, my new schoolmates and my new English teacher. We'll call him LC. He was a man in his 30s, short, fat, and with a big black mustache. If you got closer, you could see food debris and saliva in it. We all agreed then that he was very much Super Mario-like. He welcomed me and introduced me to the kids. I said hi and sat with them on the floor. Many of them introduced themselves, made some jokes. They seemed very nice and easygoing, and I was somewhat relieved. I felt integrated immediately. LC proceeded, and he told me to stand up and go to the front of the class to do the basic introductions. My name is, I am 5 years old, etc. I say it once. He makes me say it again, a bit louder. As I mentioned, I was super shy. I said it a second time. He told me to repeat myself, insisting that I say it louder. I say it again for the third time, and it seems it was never enough. His tone began to sound angry, and he goes, again, again, again. He had me repeating that stuff until I started crying, and he finally told me to sit down. My friends told me it was okay, that he was an a-hole. When I got home later that day, my mom asked me about my day at school, and I said that everything was fine, except for that teacher LC. I started crying, and I told her I didn't want to go to his class ever again. There was something about him, something dark. I didn't know what it was, but I felt it, and he scared the hell out of me. The following weeks, I kept whining to my mom in the mornings that I had English, but what could she do? She tried to calm me down, saying it was okay, to just have fun with my new friends, and that he was just a grumpy teacher. I went to that school for 4 more years. I got used to him and his peculiar character. For example, he would get really pissed when a kid was late to his class. He would yell and tell them to wait outside, sitting on the floor by the door thinking. This made us actually scared to be late to class. But there were also days where he was nice and fun. Time passed, nothing out of the ordinary, except for one thing. He would talk a lot about the FBI. We'd be with the computers in class, visiting the FBI website, reading about the most wanted criminals and stuff. Not the average English lesson for 9-year-old kids. He took pictures of us, saying they were for designing our own personalized FBI identification, kind of a game. We never saw our FBI identification cards, but we didn't think anything weird about it. Come Christmas time, he had taken a picture of the whole class to design a postcard. Years later, when I was in high school, an old classmate from that school came up to me. Hey, have you seen the news? LC was just found dead. I looked for it online, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. The police had recently found out that LC was a pedophile. In fact, the amount of material found on his computers and hard drives was so vast that it made him one of the biggest pedophiles in the whole country. When LC found out that the police were after him, he jumped into the sea near the town's port and drowned himself. Just then, I remembered that day where he didn't stop until I cried. I remembered how much he scared me, how much I didn't want to go to school because of him. I remembered his FBI obsession, our photos. Everything started to make sense. All that darkness that I felt around him. And due to his death, I no longer have to worry about seeing LC. What a good thing to know. I'm European, and when I was 16, I attended a Catholic high school in the States. It was all new to me, of course. There were so many things I had only seen in movies that amused me, some that weirded me out, and some that annoyed me. I loved it though, and I always had a great spirit of adaptation. So within the first month I was there, I already had a great group of friends. It felt precisely like being in the movies sometimes, having lunch with the cool kids at the most popular table, lockers, emergency shooting simulations, football games, all new and exciting things to me. Another new thing for me was having to change classes every hour. In the country where I'm from, you sit 5 hours in the same desk, with the same people sitting in the same seats, while the professors alternate every hour. In fact, one of my favorite classes was English, because it was the one my friends and peers attended the most. I was sitting next to this guy, who for privacy I'll call Mark, who was very nice and friendly, despite being a bit of an introvert. Everyone knew him. The school was small and among peers, and we hung out 100% despite the differences, and he was no exception, despite not being the most charismatic of the school. It amazed me that whenever I talked to him, he never looked me in the eye. He would always look around or at the ground, often moving his eyes quickly. This fascinated me, and of course, didn't disturb me at all. I found it as a way to combat shyness. No red flags. A little month had gone by since my arrival, and things were going very well. One morning, I sat down next to Mark, and we talked as usual. I asked him if he could let me copy the last part of the homework that I had not been able to do during study hall, and he accepted very kindly. We continued to chat and said goodbye. The day went on smoothly, and the next day, I noticed that Mark didn't come to school. A few days go by, and a rumor begins to circulate in the hallways that poor Mark, on his way home, had found his mother dead. But that's terrible, I thought. Such a good kid doesn't deserve such big trauma. No one does. 2 weeks pass, and the rumors continue to circulate, and we hear the most absurd theories. That the mother was with her head in the oven, or that she was attacked, or robbed, or strangled. In short, a great series of things that do not give peace to the poor lady who left us. I was very annoyed by this attitude, where this thing was just treated like any other gossip. So Mark came back to school one day, and he was very sad. The gossip ceased, although in a low voice you could still hear commentaries. But we, his friends in the senior year, squeezed into his grief without crossing the line. "I'm here for you. I'm so sorry. My condolences. Come on, let's go for lunch afterwards." And the rest of the usual things you say to a grieving friend. I've never been good at this stuff. So in English class, I put my arm around him and said a very simple, "Yo, I heard. I'm sorry." And for the first time, he looked me straight in the eye and thanked me. He was sad, deeply, but it wasn't just sadness. It was almost despair. I thought he was just grieving. If this were to happen to me, I don't think I would ever be able to recover. So I understood and respectfully left him to grieve. The next day, Mark was absent again. I kept thinking that it was normal. I wouldn't even be able to make it to school one day. I get it. And meanwhile, for reasons that I thought were completely unrelated, a man started hanging around the cafeteria during lunchtime. I asked who he was, and they said he was a husband of one of the counselors. The rumors around the school, meanwhile, continued to stir, and I got really angry because this time they were all really exaggerated. "You have to show some respect and stop even thinking such things," I told my friends. Another week went by, and the atmosphere at the school literally turned to ice. From the speakers, the principal's voice called all seniors to the gym for a communication. We went there, and next to the principal is the man. This time, however, I hear his voice for the first time, and he tells us what we already suspected. Mark had killed his mother by choking her. Although the idea had already formed in my mind, I felt the blood freeze in my veins. I didn't get the creeps simply because of the fact that an acquaintance of mine had the courage to kill his mother. I come from a fairly violent country. I have acquaintances in jails and others who, although free, have done some bad things, but never something like this. But because of the dynamics of things, The man began to tell us that he wasn't simply just a guest at the school, that he was the town detective, and that he had been conducting investigations at the school. He then told us the real story of what happened to Mark's mother. Mark had asked his mother for the car keys to be able to get to school. However, his mother needed them, and after she refused, he jumped on her and strangled her. Then, right after that, he came to school and sat next to me, gave me the English homework as if that was the main problem of the day, went home, and then called the police. The school provided a psychologist for students to talk to, in case they were bothered about the situation. However, no one consulted him. But in retrospect, I think a chat with him wouldn't have hurt. It literally felt like an episode of 13 Reasons Why, 5 years before it aired. In my school, in my country, dealing and fights happen quite often, so I thought I had seen enough. Obviously, I was wrong. And every now and then, I still think about Mark's deeply empty eyes staring back at me. This story is told from the perspective of a high school girl. So in grade 9, I would have been about 13 to 14 years old. I had no friends. I was, and still am, kind of weird, and it just threw people off. Making friends in high school was so difficult for me, because I refused to change who I was just to fit in. During the second week of school, I met a boy named George in my English class. Our teacher had sat us together, and we had begun talking and building a friendship. George was very nice, and we had a lot in common. He had come from a different elementary school. It was odd because the people from his elementary school commonly went to a different high school, although he insisted that he wanted to go to this high school because there were certain classes he wanted to take that the other school didn't offer. After about a week of talking together during English, he asked if I wanted to eat lunch with him. We had the same lunch period, and he said he noticed how I often sat alone to eat. I thought it was the nicest gesture, so I agreed. We ended up having lunch together for a while, but then I started making some new friends. I always invited him to eat lunch with a few of the friends I had made, but he always declined. Then one day in English class, he passed me a note. This was very strange, since we were sitting right next to each other. The note said something like, "I need to talk to you. Can we please sit alone together for lunch?" I wrote back that I would sit with him, and we hardly spoke the rest of the period. I got a really strange vibe from him. So it's lunchtime. I see him sitting at the end of a row. I go to sit down and he said, "No, let's go outside to talk." So I agreed. He looked genuinely upset, and I wanted to know what was going on. When we got outside, he led me over to sit on a curb in front of the school, and he started talking very aggressively. He told me that it was unfair of me to make other friends when he was the one who befriended me first. He told me that I had to eat lunch with him, because when I was alone, he ate lunch with me. So now that he's alone, I was obligated to eat with him. It was a very bizarre conversation. I explained that he could sit with me and my friends, and that way there wouldn't be any issue, and that he could even make some new friends. I told him I had enough friendship to spread around, and that he had nothing to be upset about. What he said next completely shocked me. I could see the anger in his eyes. He grabbed my arm and said, "I don't think you understand. You owe me this. You will sit with me." I got completely freaked out at that point, and told him we could sit alone together every other day. I just wanted to get away from him and go back inside where more people were around. After this day, I started getting weird messages to my email. I'll never forget the first email I was sent. It said, "All women are Satan. The devil lives in you all." I didn't recognize the email address and assumed it was just some internet troll trying to scare me. Then they started coming more frequently, all with the same type of message. "Women are the devil. Satan lives in all women." I started getting scared, so I showed my friends these emails. They agreed it was weird, but also agreed it was probably some random person just trying to scare people. But my one friend, Stacy, told me that she thought it was George. She had heard stories about why he came to our school instead of going to the high school that his grade 8 graduating class was going to. She told me he was so obsessed with one of the girls in his class that her mom actually got a restraining order against him. I told her that sounded insane. I didn't believe it. I was still having lunch with George on alternate days, and we were still friendly during English class, but I really wanted to distance myself from him. After Christmas break, our schedules changed for the second semester. I was honestly very happy about this, because I knew I'd have a different lunch period than George, and we wouldn't have English together anymore. I could slowly disassociate myself from him. But I was wrong. He started leaving notes in my locker, confessing his undying love, and how we were meant to take over the world together, which at the time I thought was very nice of him to say, but the feelings were not mutual. Eventually, I had to tell him that enough was enough. I explained that he was overwhelming me, and that I needed a little space from our friendship. He seemed to understand. He didn't get upset or yell. He just agreed to give me my space, which lasted about 2 days before the emails started getting worse. And they started threatening my life, telling me they knew where I lived and went to school. I went straight to my mom when this started happening, as I know I should have done sooner. My mom called the police. The police informed the school, and the school looked up the email in their records and found out that it was George all along sending me these nasty emails. And George was suspended from school and wouldn't even look at me anymore. I was honestly relieved. Fast forward to a year after we graduated high school, George and his mother had went for a drive. While she was driving, he stabbed her over 100 times. He had a psychotic break. When the police found him, he tried saying it was a car accident, but when they questioned him about all the stab wounds, he admitted to killing her and trying to release the devil from his mother's soul. He pleaded insanity against the murder of his mother and was not held criminally responsible for her murder. This video contains 3 horrifying true summer camp stories. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe, and watch this one next.